It was a sunny afternoon in Los Angeles, the kind of day where the world feels calm and ordinary. Birds chirped, cars hummed down the street, and children laughed in the park. But within minutes, one family's world was about to shatter, and another man's courage would change everything. David Miller, a 12-year-old boy, was the only son of Robert and Emma Miller, a couple who had everything money could buy. Robert was a real estate tycoon, mansions, private jets, luxury cars, you name it. But for all his wealth, he had one thing that money could never truly guarantee: his son's life. That day Robert had taken David to a nearby lake resort for a father-son weekend. It was rare for Robert to take time off work, but David had been begging him for weeks. "Come on, Dad, just one weekend. No phones, no meetings, just us," the boy had said. Robert had finally agreed, wanting to prove to his son that he wasn't just a businessman, but a dad who cared. At the same time, across town, a man named James Carter was finishing his morning shift at a construction site. He was a single father raising his 8-year-old daughter, Lily. His life was the exact opposite of Robert's. No luxury cars, no vacations, no time for rest. Just hard work, bills, and love for the little girl who gave his life meaning. James didn't complain much, but life had been hard since his wife passed away from cancer 2 years earlier. Every day was a struggle to make ends meet. But he always told Lily, "As long as we have each other, we're rich." And Lily, in her innocence, believed it. That afternoon, the paths of these two fathers, one rich, one poor, would collide in a way no one could ever predict. The lake was beautiful, sparkling under the sun. Robert and David rented a small motorboat and cruised out into the deeper waters. They laughed, took selfies, and for the first time in a long while, Robert felt like the father he'd always wanted to be. But then, in a heartbeat, everything went wrong. David leaned over the edge to grab his hat that had blown off in the wind. The boat rocked sharply, and before Robert could react, David slipped and fell into the cold, deep water. "David!" Robert screamed, diving in after him. But the water was freezing and murky. The boy went under fast. Robert wasn't a strong swimmer, and panic overtook him. He tried to reach his son, but exhaustion and fear dragged him down. On the nearby dock, James and Lily were walking home after feeding ducks. When James heard the distant screams, he turned instantly. He saw the capsized boat, a man thrashing helplessly, and a child disappearing under the surface. Without hesitation, he dropped everything and ran. "Stay here, Lily!" he shouted, sprinting toward the edge of the dock. He didn't think about who they were, or whether he could even make it back alive. He just knew someone was dying, and he had to act. He dove into the lake, cutting through the icy water with powerful strokes. Years of working construction had built his strength, but the cold bit into his muscles. He pushed through, diving deeper and deeper until he caught sight of a small hand sinking into the dark. He grabbed David and kicked upward with all his might. When they broke the surface, the boy wasn't breathing. Robert, gasping for air, clung to the boat, his face pale with terror. "Give him to me," James shouted, dragging David toward the dock. He climbed up, water streaming off him, and laid the boy flat on the wooden planks. His hands shook, but he didn't stop. He started CPR. 1, 2, 3. He pressed on the boy's chest, breathing into his mouth between compressions. Minutes felt like hours. Robert knelt beside him, sobbing, "Please, please save him." James didn't respond. He just kept going, pushing past his own exhaustion. Then suddenly, David coughed. Water burst from his mouth as he gasped for air. His eyes opened. For a moment, everything stopped. Robert froze, tears falling from his face. James sat back, breathing heavily, soaked and trembling, but alive. "Thank God," Robert whispered. He grabbed his son, holding him close. "You're okay. You're okay." James stood slowly, water dripping from his clothes. He looked at the boy, then at his own daughter, who was watching wide-eyed from the shore. Relief washed over him like a wave. Paramedics arrived shortly after, alerted by nearby witnesses. They checked David and confirmed he'd been seconds, literally seconds, from dying. 3 more minutes underwater, and it would have been too late, one of them said. Robert turned to James, his voice breaking. "You saved my son's life. I don't even know how to thank you." James just smiled faintly. "Just glad he's okay." Robert tried to insist on repaying him. "I can give you anything. Money, a house, whatever you want." But James shook his head. "I didn't do it for a reward. I did what any father would do. Those words struck Robert deeply. In that moment, he realized something. He had spent his life chasing wealth, thinking success meant comfort and control. But this man, who had nothing, had just risked his life for a stranger's child without hesitation. As the ambulance drove away, Robert walked over to Lily and knelt down. "Your dad is a hero," he said softly. Lily smiled shyly and said, "I know." That night, after everything settled, Robert couldn't sleep. He kept replaying the moment over and over. The fear, the helplessness, and that final breath of his son returning to life. He knew he owed everything to that man. The next day, he found James's address through the police report. It was a small, run-down apartment complex across town. He knocked on the door, carrying a small box in his hand. James opened the door, surprised. "Mr. Miller, what are you doing here?" Robert smiled warmly. "I came to thank you properly." He handed James the box. Inside was a brand new set of tools, professional grade, the kind James could never afford. And under it was an envelope. "I told you, I don't need," James began, but Robert interrupted. "It's not charity, it's an opportunity." Inside the envelope was a job offer, supervisor of maintenance at one of Robert's new housing projects. A steady, well-paying job, with benefits for his daughter's education. James was stunned. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Robert said. "Because you deserve it. And because I want my son to grow up knowing what real strength looks like." Over time, the two families became close friends. David and Lily grew up like siblings, their bond forged in the most unlikely of circumstances. Robert often visited their modest home, and every time he saw James working, laughing with his daughter, or fixing something by hand, he was reminded of the day he almost lost everything, and the man who gave it all back. Years later, when David turned 18, he gave a speech at his graduation. He said, "When I was 12, I almost died. But that day taught me something no classroom ever could, that heroes aren't always the ones in movies or uniforms. Sometimes, they're ordinary people who make extraordinary choices. My hero is a man who had every reason to walk away, but instead, he jumped in." The audience gave him a standing ovation. In the front row, Robert wiped a tear, while James sat beside him, proud but humble as always. After the ceremony, David walked up to James and hugged him tightly. "I'm alive because of you," he said. James smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You're alive because you still had something left to do in this world. Make it count." And David did. He went on to start a non-profit organization that helped children from low-income families learn swimming and water safety, dedicated in honor of James Carter. Years passed, and though the world moved on, that one act of courage continued to ripple through lives. One man's decision, to dive into danger for a child he didn't know, became a story told in classrooms, newspapers, and family dinners. And whenever people asked James why he did it, he would simply say, "Because when you're a parent, every child feels like your own." Sometimes, the greatest wealth a man can have isn't in his bank account. It's in his heart. And on that day by the lake, a poor single dad proved that even when you have nothing, you can still give the world everything. Because true richness isn't about money. It's about courage, about love, about doing the right thing when no one is watching. And that day, when a millionaire's son had only 3 minutes to live, a poor father's heart bought him a lifetime. As time passed, life took its turns. The Millers, once known only for their fortune, became known for something far greater, their humanity. Robert had changed. The experience by the lake had stripped away every layer of pride and reminded him that no man is untouchable, no matter how much power or wealth he holds. He started spending more time with David, showing up for soccer games, cooking breakfast on Sundays, helping with homework, things he used to think he was too busy for. And every time he saw his son laugh, he silently remembered the man who made that laughter possible. Meanwhile, James's life also took a new direction. The new job at Robert's company changed everything. For the first time in years, he didn't have to worry about whether he could pay the rent or buy school supplies for Lily. He worked hard, as he always had, but now his effort was recognized. People respected him, not for saving a millionaire's son, but for the kind of person he was every single day. But perhaps the most beautiful part was the friendship that grew between these two families. They started meeting every weekend. Simple dinners, family outings, birthdays celebrated together. Robert and James became something